Hello everyone. It's time to talk about medieval science and medicine. This is a topic that I really enjoy. I hope that you'll find it interesting too. First thing I should say is that medieval science and medicine were not nearly as modern as our own, but there were some consistencies inside it that made logical sense to medieval people. And medieval people were not stupid, as you're aware. One of the things that greatly impacted the way that universities understood the universe was the rediscovery of Aristotle in the High Middle Ages. You can see here that after Roman times, many of his works were lost to the Latin-speaking world, and the texts were translated from Greek into Arabic in Baghdad in the 900s. I'm going to talk more about this kind of transmission in just a minute. So for these texts to get back to Europe, they first had to be returned physically to Europe. Then they had to be translated, which required a sanction from the church or government, and you needed good translators. Mostly these translators were in Spain. If you think about it, that would be logical. Many of them were Jews. What comes from Aristotle is a view of the universe that medieval people found very persuasive. And the idea comes from Aristotle, a work called De Cello, which means on the heavens. According to Aristotle, the universe was made up of 5 elements: air, water, fire, earth, which are the traditional Greek substances that make up the world. And then ether, which was Aristotle's own invention, a substance that existed outside the Earth's atmosphere and which made up the planets and the stars. Aristotle's universe is finite. It has an inside and an outside. And I call it the beach ball universe because it's as though the universe is an enormous beach ball and the universe exists inside the ball. Here's an illustration of that. We'll look at the illustrations a bit more in class, but I think you can see in the middle is the Earth, surrounded by a ring of fire. Then the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and that was as far as they could see in those days. It's the furthest planet that you can see with the naked eye. And then a hard outer covering which contains the stars, the signs of the zodiac, and eventually something that medieval thinkers placed on the outside of Aristotle's universe: Caelum imperium habitaculum Dei et omnium electorum, the empire of the heavens and the little abode of God and all the elect. So Aristotle's universe provides this really convenient place for heaven. Here is another illustration of it from a medieval manuscript. In this case, Adam and Eve are in the middle, and here are all the various rings of the universe surrounding them. Here's another one. Now you can tell from this that medieval people never believed the earth was flat. They always believed that it was round. They just didn't agree about how big it was or what was on the other side of it. So that is a myth that comes from legends about Christopher Columbus. And if you look at this picture, you can see that there are, people talk about the 4 corners of the world. There are 4 angels here with stuff at the corners. But nobody in medieval Europe actually believed the earth was flat who had any education. Medieval thinkers liked Aristotle because, as I just mentioned, it provides a physical place for heaven, but there's more to it than that. Human beings like to think of themselves as the center of the cosmos, and this provided an earth-centered cosmos as described in Scripture. So, for example, the story of Joshua in the Old Testament. At one point, Joshua, fighting the Battle of Jericho, stops the sun by asking God to stop the sun while he's fighting so that the sun will continue to shine in his enemies' eyes. Well, it doesn't make sense that the Earth would stop as the sun goes around, the Earth would stop going around the sun. It actually only makes sense if the sun goes around the Earth. And so all of the Bible stories that medieval people took very literally fitted in nicely with the way that Aristotle described the universe. It also reflected what Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scientists, all of whom are working at this point, observed about the natural world. So if you looked at the sky with the naked eye, the telescope hasn't been invented yet, you could see where they're coming from. It looks like there are things up in the sky there that are moving. In the matter of fact, the word planet, planete, in Greek, means a wanderer. Let's talk human body for a little bit, now that we've talked about the universe. The two most important thinkers of medieval medicine are Hippocrates, who was Greek and lived in the 5th and 4th century BCE, who set out the basic beliefs about human physiology. And you probably have heard of him if you've heard of the Hippocratic Oath. Note that the word hypocritical and the word Hippocratic are not related to one another. The Hippocratic Oath is an oath that physicians still sometimes take to treat their patients fairly. Then the second one is Galen. He was Roman. He lived in the 2nd, and 3rd century CE. Worked to create a combination of the works of Aristotle and Hippocrates, and also added greatly to medical knowledge of his time through dissection. Now, it seems sort of strange that doctors this old would have been important so many hundreds of years later, but that is not unusual in the Middle Ages. They are constantly looking back at the Greeks and Romans for what they consider to be the best information. Okay. This is a little dizzying, but I wanted to show you some of the medical manuscripts make a baffling series of journeys through different languages to get back to Europe. So if we start here with works that are written in Greek, like Hippocrates and Galen, they're written in Greek. Some of them make their way into Syriac, which is a language related to Aramaic. And some of them make their way from Syriac into Arabic. And then Arabic makes its way to Spain and translated into Latin, and then Latin makes its way back up into Europe. What I want you to understand from this is that sometimes these works have been through multiple language translations before they make it into Latin, so that European doctors can use them. And that, as you can imagine, is somewhat problematic, because look at how different these languages are. You can tell how different they are simply because of their alphabets. But of course, it's much more complex than that. One of the greatest doctors of the period, and probably the whole history of medicine, was a Muslim doctor by the name of Avicenna. His Arabic name is Ibn Sina. In Latin, he was referred to as Avicenna. He lived from 980 to 1037 CE, and he began studying in the Muslim Empire at age 16. And by the time he was 20, he was treating people as a doctor. He eventually became the doctor to the Caliph in Baghdad, a very important doctor, and he's super important for his work, The Canon of Medicine, Al-Qanon, which was a complete codification of every piece of information he could get about medical traditions. So Hippocrates and Galen, prominent Arab physicians of his era, and his own research and his own opinions. An enormous work, which was actively taught until the 19th century when microorganisms were discovered. So this is the most famous doctor you've never heard of, the guy who wrote the Canon of Medicine. For the Middle Ages, it is extremely important. Now we're going to talk about diagnosing illness in class as part of our activity. But let me just say a few things about it first. The most important tool of diagnosing illness in this period is urinalysis, and by that I mean looking and smelling and sometimes even tasting the urine of a patient. You're diagnosing something called the humoral balance. I'll explain that in class as well. We'll talk more about that and about human dissection in class.